All right, so today we're taking The Road Less Traveled, a book you're clearly already familiar with, and seeing if we can discover some hidden pathways or maybe some scenic overlooks we haven't noticed before. You've shared a summary, some key quotes, even action points. You're clearly not just a casual reader.
It's a book that rewards rereading, wouldn't
Yeah.
you say? Published back in '78, and it still has this magnetic pull for people.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, when you revisit it, what jumps out at you now compared to, say, your first encounter with Peck's words?
Honestly, it's the simplicity of that opening statement. Life is difficult.
Mm.
It's so stark, yet Peck doesn't present it as a bad thing, almost like accepting that sets us free to actually start living well.
Not just living, but growing. Peck doesn't shy away from the fact that this growth often comes with some pretty tough challenges, right? Which brings us to his concept of discipline. It's almost like he's saying, before we can even talk about love or spirituality, there's this groundwork we need to lay.
Exactly. And it's more than just willpower. Take delaying gratification, for example. It's not just about resisting that extra slice of cake. It's tied to Peck's idea of self-love, isn't it? Making those hard choices now because you're invested in your future self's well-being.
That's a really interesting perspective. So it's not about deprivation, but about valuing yourself enough to make those difficult choices.
Absolutely. And it's easy to misunderstand Peck's second tool, accepting responsibility. It can sound a bit harsh at first glance,
Right. It makes you think, wait, so everything's my fault.
but he's very specific about separating neurotic guilt, which holds us back from the healthy kind that helps us learn accepting responsibility for guilt. Peck is about empowerment, not blame.
Okay, I'm starting to see the nuance here, but how would you differentiate those two types of guilt, especially when looking back on past choices?
Peck would likely say to ask yourself, is this guilt leading me to positive change, or is it keeping me stuck in self-recrimination?
So it's about using that reflection to inform our actions moving forward.
Precisely. Accepting responsibility isn't about dwelling in the past, but about recognizing our power to choose differently in the present.
This really flips the script on how we view responsibility, doesn't it? It's less about fault and more about ownership of our choices.
And ultimately about growth,
Right.
which is, of course, the overarching theme of the entire book.
All right, so we've got delaying gratification and accepting responsibility as the first two tools. Peck outlines what about his idea of dedication to truth? How does that fit into this framework of discipline?
This is where Peck dives into the importance of honesty, both with ourselves and with others. He suggests that avoiding truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is a major roadblock on the path to personal growth.
He's really challenging us to confront those things we'd rather sweep under the rug, huh?
He is, and he distinguishes between two levels of truth. There's the everyday truth, the factual truth, but then there's what he calls transcendent truth, which is more about aligning our lives with our deepest values and purpose.
So it's about recognizing that sometimes living truthfully might mean making choices that go against societal expectations or even our own comfort zones.
Exactly. It's about having the courage to live in alignment with our authentic selves, even when it's difficult. And that takes discipline not in a restrictive sense, but in a way that empowers us to make choices that support our growth.
Okay, so we're seeing a pattern here. Delaying gratification connects to self-love, accepting responsibility is about empowerment, and dedication to truth is about living authentically. It seems like each of these tools builds upon the last.
They do. And that brings us to the final tool, balancing. It's perhaps the most nuanced of the four,
Mhm.
and it's essential for navigating the complexities of life.
I'm intrigued. Let's dive into that a bit further. What exactly does Peck mean by balancing, and how does it tie into these other disciplines?
Balancing for Peck isn't about finding some perfect static equilibrium. It's more about recognizing the constant ebb and flow of life and learning to adapt.
So it's like we're always recalibrating, finding that sweet spot as things shift around us.
Precisely. It's a dynamic process, and it requires us to be flexible, open to new information, and willing to adjust our course as needed.
Peck even argues that clinging too tightly to one idea or belief system, no matter how valid it might seem, can actually be a form of imbalance, right?
Absolutely. He calls it clinging to the partial truth, and suggests it can prevent us from seeing the full picture.
That's fascinating. It seems like he's encouraging us to approach life with a certain level of humility, acknowledging that we don't have all the answers.
And that there's always more to learn. This ties back to his emphasis on dedicating ourselves to truth, not just in the factual sense, but also in the sense of being open to new perspectives and willing to challenge our own assumptions.
It's like he's saying true growth requires a willingness to constantly question and evolve, not just settling into a comfortable but potentially limiting worldview.
Exactly. And mastering these first steps of discipline, as Peck calls
Yeah.
them, leads us to what's often considered the most profound and challenging aspect of his work, his concept of love.
Okay, yes. This is where things get really interesting because Peck's definition of love is anything but conventional. He famously states that love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth.
It's a powerful statement, and one that challenges the common notion of love as primarily a feeling.
It almost sounds more like a verb than a noun, wouldn't you say? It's about action, about intention, about actively participating in the growth of both ourselves and others.
Precisely. And that requires effort, discipline, and a willingness to prioritize growth even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient.
This reminds me of another one of his quotes. Love is, as love does, it's really about the actions we take, not just the feelings we have.
It's easy to say I love you, but Peck would say, show me, how are you actively contributing to the well-being and growth of yourself and the people you claim to love?
It's a high bar he's setting, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. But I think that's what makes his definition so compelling. He's not offering easy answers or feel-good platitudes. He's presenting love as a practice, a conscious choice we make each and every day.
And it's not just limited to romantic love, is it? He applies this definition to all forms of relationships.
Exactly. From the love we have for our parents and siblings to the love we extend to our friends, colleagues, and even our communities, Peck challenges us to see love as an active force that shapes our interactions and impacts the world around us.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together, the discipline, the love, and how it all ties into spiritual growth, which is, of course, the next stage of the journey Peck lays out in The Road Less Traveled.
And it's perhaps the most challenging aspect of the book for some readers to grasp, because Peck doesn't shy away from discussing faith and the concept of grace, but he does so in a way that transcends any specific religion or dogma.
It's definitely a shift from the more practical psychological aspects of the earlier chapters. What would you say to someone who's struggling with this section, maybe feeling a bit lost or confused by Peck's exploration of spirituality?
I'd encourage them to focus on the core message, which is about recognizing that there might be something larger than ourselves at play in our lives. Peck doesn't offer concrete answers, but he invites us to explore the mystery and to be open to the possibility of something beyond our immediate understanding.
So it's not about subscribing to a particular belief system, but about cultivating a sense of awe and wonder towards the unknown.
Exactly. And Peck's concept of grace plays a significant role here.
Yes. This is a concept I think we could delve a little deeper into. He describes it as a force that aids in our growth, but what does that look like practically? What are some of the ways grace might manifest in our lives?
Well, it talks about grace showing up in those moments of sudden insight or clarity where we feel a sense of connection to something larger than ourselves. It could be through nature, through art, through human connection, or even in moments of quiet contemplation. It's often when we least expect it, and it can be transformative.
So it's like a kind of unexpected gift, something that helps us along the path even when we don't realize we need it.
You could say that he also talks about those times when we feel a surge of strength or courage to face a difficult situation, even when we feel utterly depleted. Peck suggests grace might be at work in those moments too, supporting us in ways we can't fully comprehend.
It's almost like a subtle nudge in the right direction, a reminder that we're not alone in our struggles.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it, and it connects to the action points you've provided, which offers some really practical ways to start putting Peck's ideas into practice.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at those now. The first one is practice discipline, which feels a bit broad. Where would you suggest someone start if they want to cultivate more discipline in their lives?
Peck would likely say, start small, choose one specific area where you want to grow. Maybe it's sticking to a daily writing routine or being more mindful about your spending habits. The key is consistency, wouldn't you say?
So not trying to overhaul everything at once, but focusing on building one positive habit at a time.
Exactly. And it ties back to delaying gratification, choosing the long-term benefit over the immediate impulse.
The next action point you've listed is embrace responsibility. That can feel daunting, especially given Peck's nuanced view of what responsibility actually entails.
Remember, it's about empowerment, not blaming. A good starting point might be to simply notice when you're blaming others or external circumstances for your current situation.
So developing that self-awareness to recognize, hey, I'm playing the victim role here. What choices did I make that contributed to this outcome?
Exactly. And then it becomes about, okay, what can I learn from this? How can I use this experience to make different choices moving forward?
That's a much more constructive approach than dwelling in guilt or shame. It's about taking ownership of your choices, both the positive and the negative, and using them as fuel for growth.
It's about recognizing that we always have a choice even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment.
Which leads us to the next action point: commit to truth. This feels especially relevant in today's world where it's so easy to curate an image of ourselves that might not fully reflect reality.
Peck would likely say that true growth requires us to confront those curated images and be honest about who we are, both the light and shadow sides.
He talks about the importance of shadow work, doesn't he? Facing those parts of ourselves that we'd rather keep hidden.
He does. And it's not about dwelling in negativity or self-criticism. It's about bringing those hidden parts to the surface so we can integrate them into a more whole and authentic self.
It sounds like a challenging but ultimately liberating process.
Absolutely. And remember, Peck emphasizes that truth isn't just about self-reflection. It's also about being honest with others, even when it's difficult.
Which, as you mentioned earlier, takes courage and compassion.
It does. It's about learning to communicate our needs and feelings authentically, while also being receptive to the truth of others, even when it challenges our own perspectives.
So it's about cultivating a deep level of honesty and authenticity in all our relationships.
Precisely. And that brings us to the fourth action point: foster real love. We've already unpacked Peck's definition of love as a choice, as a commitment to nurturing spiritual growth. But how do we actually translate that into action?
Right, because it's one thing to intellectually understand Peck's concept of love, but quite another to embody it in our daily lives.
I think it starts with asking ourselves, how can I support the growth of the people I care about? And it's not about fixing them or telling them what to do, but about creating a space for them to blossom into their fullest selves.
So it's about being present, listening deeply, and offering support without judgment.
Exactly. And remember, Peck emphasizes that real love requires us to extend that same compassion and care to ourselves.
That's such an important point. It's easy to focus on nurturing others while neglecting our own needs.
It is. And that's where those first three tools of discipline come into play: delaying gratification, to prioritize our well-being, accepting responsibility for our choices, and dedicating ourselves to living authentically. It all lays the foundation for cultivating healthy, loving relationships with both ourselves and others.
And finally, we have welcome spiritual growth. This one might feel a bit more abstract than the others. What are some tangible steps we can take to nurture our spiritual side?
Remember, Peck isn't advocating for any specific religious practice. He's suggesting that spiritual growth is about connecting with something larger than ourselves, whatever that might look like for each individual.
So it's about finding what resonates with us personally and creating space for those practices in our lives.
Exactly. It could be spending time in nature, engaging in creative pursuits, meditating, practicing gratitude, or simply sitting in stillness and allowing ourselves to be present in the moment. It's about cultivating a sense of awe and wonder toward the mystery of life.
These action points provide a beautiful framework for incorporating Peck's teachings into our lives. They remind us that personal growth is an ongoing journey, and that by embracing disciplined love and a willingness to explore the unknown, we can embark on a path of profound transformation.
And that journey might not always be easy, but it's certainly worth taking.
Well said. The Road Less Traveled is a timeless guidebook for anyone seeking a more meaningful and fulfilling life. We've covered a lot of ground today, but there's always more to uncover, more to explore within its pages.
It's a book that offers something new each time you revisit it, and ultimately it reminds us that the most important journey is the one we take within ourselves.
This has been a truly illuminating deep dive into The Road Less Traveled. Thank you for sharing your insights and helping us navigate these complex ideas.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has sparked some new insights and inspired you to continue exploring the road less traveled and the profound wisdom it holds. Until next time, keep choosing the path that leads to your most authentic self.